You've survived another week. Thank you for listening, downloading, and supporting the Black Man with a Gun Show. This week, lies and damn lies about gun reform. It's Easter weekend, so I want to talk about, for all those who take up the sword will die by the sword, the truth about the Bible and this thing we call self-defense. Talk about that story with Peter and Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. Andrew Branca with the Law of Self-Defense tip of the week. And Michael J. Woodland shares with us about cleaning your rifle. Yeah, we're going to get a little funky this week. Are you ready? Let's do it.
BlackManWithAGun.com, Ken Blanchard's Pro-Gun Podcast.
I want to thank all of our awesome supporters that are supporting us and our new ones from patreon.com/blackmanwithagun.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
If you look online right now, the internet is ablaze with vitriol, with lies, with craziness concerning gun control. I can't believe in this day and age when you can go to Google or YouTube and search just about anything. Bing even. Grab a search engine, grab a search feature, and you can't find the correct answer. But you have well-meaning politicians, you have lawyers, you have educated people saying stupid stuff, which means they're doing it on purpose. We have seen wars and assassinations. We have witnessed terrorist attacks and the spread of deadly diseases. Most of us were around in the mid-'60s when Congress passed the Gun Control Act and homicides increased. We remember that the assault weapons ban of the 1990s made little difference in the amount of crime in America. But the latest trick, the latest scam, the latest falsehood is when they take innocent kids who are still mourning the death of friends and allow them, promote them, pimp them, support them for their agendas. I know they're cute and all. I know you're proud that they're a part of the process. Everybody wants to protest something. But you're not listening. You're not reading. You're not investigating. You're not doing your own research. Yeah, baby girl got a nice little sign. And we are just so proud of her. Yes, we are. Isn't she precious? So how can the gun people be so insensitive, so mean to the little kids? Because it's stupid. The world isn't perfect, my friend. You can't regulate it to perfection. There's about one gun for every citizen inside the U.S. already. It would be impossible to collect this massive trove of guns. Even if the government wanted to, they cannot control guns already present or guns that would find their ways into the hands of those who want them. Laws don't apply to criminals. Gun control does not address the issue of gun-related crimes. In 2010, gun sales in Chicago were forbidden. There were 432 murders in 2010 and 500 in 2012. The FBI named Chicago the nation's murder capital. If a criminal is going to break the law, they will find a way. Prohibition didn't stop alcohol. Gun control won't stop guns. The people who prospered during Prohibition by importing and supplying alcohol were gangsters. If gun control were in place, the people we'd really have to worry about would be the modern-day Al Capones supplying guns. The problem of evil would be much worse. Murderers like soft targets. They like targeting elementary schools, churches, and theaters, not places where they think guns are likely to be. The Second Amendment is not antiquated. It's not old-timey. It's not needing to be repealed or done away with. Gun rights will still protect you from a police state. The traitor, also known as Edward Snowden, brought our diminished constitutional rights to light. Big Brother is not a myth. It's a violation of the Constitution. If the government doesn't protect your right, what will? Murderers will get access to guns, even with strict gun laws in place. In 2009, a German high school student went on a rampage and killed 15 people. He didn't have a gun. He used his father's 9mm pistol. Even in a country with strict gun laws, a murderer was able to find one and use it. Armed civilians help take out the bad guys. I know it sounds cliche now, but a good guy with a gun is a good thing. If we go back in the Wayback Machine, how about Austin, Texas in 1966? A sniper in a tower shot at University of Austin students for 90 minutes. The police who reacted had help. Students went to their trucks and grabbed their rifles and shot alongside of the police. It was enough to pin the shooter down and allow the police to take that person out. Police then thanked the civilians for helping them fire on the shooter. The Second Amendment is not intended for just ordinary home defense. The intent was to guarantee the nation could never be overcome by any military power, foreign or domestic. If the military was not available, say a nuclear holocaust or a synchronized Pearl Harbor occurred, you would have to protect yourself. The same thing goes for a natural disaster or terrorist attack. There will be a time when the government can't get to you. However long that is, you are on your own. Limiting the type of rifles hurts you. Putting a limit on AR rifles limits your Second Amendment rights. If the government restricts the types of rifles or limits the amount of ammo that you have, there's no limit to what they can restrict. The infringement of your constitutional rights won't stop at the type of the arms you can bear. Who knows what other rights they'll take away? Freedom of speech, freedom of religion. Did you know that the United Kingdom, England, banned handguns in 1997 after a man shot 16 elementary students and then shot himself? Let's look at their homicide rate before, during, and after the ban. In 1996, the murder rate was 1.12 per 100,000 people. In 1997, it rose to 1.24. In 1998, the rate rose even further to 1.43. And in 2002, it peaked to 2.1 homicides per 100,000. Just because you ban guns doesn't mean people won't find other ways to massacre other human beings. It is the intent of the person, not the tool. It is the heart of man that is desperately wicked. So what is gun reform, really? Tighter controls on acquiring and owning guns, I hear. They talk about gun show loopholes. What exactly is that? They don't want ammunition to be sold online. Here's a good one. How about reasonable gun control? How about blaming the innocent, the law-abiding? How about blaming the National Rifle Association for the deaths of anybody? These are just a few reasons why sane people, why mature people, why adults frown and pretty much ignore the hoopla that you've heard recently with the kids. I even heard that they want the retailers to be responsible for doing the background checks, the psychological and the medical evaluations, and somehow having some character references before a purchase can be done. Wow, that's pretty intense. Not realistic at all. And do me a favor, please stop saying gun violence. It's just violence. I can't take you serious when you don't even talk correctly. And again, if you Googled it, if you did some research, you'd know the answers. You look up everything else. Down under, in Australia, murders increased by about 19%, and armed robberies increased about 29% after the gun ban was instituted. Can I share more with you about England? Despite the very strict bans on guns in the UK, the overall rate of violent crime in England is about 4 times higher than it is in the U.S. In one recent year, there were 2,034 violent crimes per 100,000 people in the UK. In the United States, there was only 466 violent crimes per 100,000 people during the same year. Do you really want to be more like England? England has approximately 125% more rape victims per 100,000 people each year than the U.S. does. The UK has approximately 133% more assault victims per 100,000 people than the U.S. does. The UK has the 4th highest burglary rate in the EU. The UK has the second highest overall crime rate in the EU. Yeah, I know, we got places like Chicago, though. And it has some of the strictest gun laws in the US. So what has that done to reduce crime? Nothing. The murder rate in Chicago was about 17% higher in 2012 than it was in 2011, and Chicago is now considered to be the deadliest global city. If you can believe it, there were about as many murders in Chicago during 2012 as there were in the entire nation of Japan. So please, please, please forgive the gun community for not rolling over and showing you our underbelly, for not surrendering, not giving up our guns for your march for our lives. I am very pro-life, actually. My life.
Excuse me while I whip this out.
Crossbreed holsters are some of the finest holsters in America. They are imitated for a reason. They sell holsters, belts, modular systems. The U.S. company that my friend Mark Craig had started in 2005 has been a supporter for you and I for almost a decade. Crossbreed Holsters has raised the standard for customer service in the holster industry through its 2-week try-it-free guarantee and a lifetime warranty. You tried the rest, now get the best. Go to crossbreedholsters.com and tell them Ken sent you. crossbreedholsters.com. And Michael, you're up next, sir.
Thank you, Ken, and welcome to another Tips and Review segment. I am Michael Woodland, and today we're going to discuss cleaning a rifle properly. How many of us take the time to actually clean our firearm after every session at the range? How many of us actually fire our rifles once a month, but clean the same firearm once a week? There is no real true answer, but how you view your firearm and your belief. Would you think of me differently if I told you I do not clean my firearm regularly? Upon my earlier days in the Army, I took notice at how my shot groups started out in a spreading pattern, but after a few rounds, the shot groups were so tight, it was like artwork. At the same time, I didn't realize that residue from the bullet and the gases were making it better, so to speak. It is important to understand how your firearm operates in a variety of conditions to understand it better. Me personally, I do not clean my firearm after every session at the range or match I frequent. My M4 rifle has not been cleaned in over 6 months, but I do not run it hard. The determination of when to clean my M4 rifle is when my shot groups start to spread out from being consistently close. There has never been any malfunctions with my firearm due to the lack of maintenance, but if I have a match or event that I consider to be high profile, then I will clean it in order to lessen the chances of mishaps from lack of cleaning. Then there is the belief that the firearms of today will run dirty and keep going. This could be true, but when the time is needed to pull your firearm, you do not want to be correcting any type of malfunctions, especially when your life is on the line. With that being said, this is my personal opinion on how to clean my rifle, and I do not say this is the gospel, but a technique that works for me. There are multiple ways to clean your firearm, and if you go to YouTube, there are a ton of videos to get a general idea. Me personally, I like to use Rogers Advanced Gun Cleaning Solution and can be found at rogershootingschool.com. If you are not one who likes to put your firearm in water, this is not going to be the solution for you. My experience with this product has been going on now for over 3 years and never had any issues. There are many solutions and cleaners out there that works in different processes, but a rag, a bore brush for the caliber of your firearm, CLP, also known as cleaning, lubricant, and protectant, and a regular cleaning brush that looks like a toothbrush will also get the job done. Cleaning your firearm is just as important as firing it. It is a process that goes hand in hand. Take a few moments and clean your firearm and take a look for anything that is out of place or looks worn. Keep your firearm in top working order as you do with the maintenance of your vehicle, and you will be happy with it for years to come. For those who are looking to contact me, visit blackmanwiththegun.com and under the Leaders tab, click on my name, Michael Woodland, and shoot me an email. Until next week, keep shooting, keep practicing, and have fun. Back to you, Ken.
If you carry a gun for self-defense, be smarter and join the United States Concealed Carry Association so you can be covered in case you have to use the thing to protect your life from the judicial system. Upfront bail bond funding, attorney counseling, personal hardship coverage, membership deals and discounts, firearms theft, liability coverage, and more. Go to uscca.blackmanwiththegun.com right now. uscca.blackmanwiththegun.com. Thanks, Michael. Appreciate that, man. I'm going to work on getting my gun a little bit more tighter. Next up, as you can guess by the music, is our Law of Self-Defense part with Andrew. Andrew, you're up next, sir.
Thanks, Ken, for having me back on for another Law of Self-Defense case of the week. I'm attorney Andrew Branca with lawofselfdefense.com. This case of the week is provided for educational purposes only. If you are in need of legal advice, you must consult with an attorney in the relevant jurisdiction. This case of the week is Orton v. Commonwealth out of the Kentucky Court of Appeals in a decision handed down March 16, 2018. It involves a homeowner and local businessman who found himself engaged by 4 armed home invaders. He ends up taking, in purported self-defense, actions that kill 2 of the home invaders and seriously injure the other 2. And yet, in the end, it was the homeowner who found himself convicted, sentenced to 15 years in prison, and had his conviction affirmed by the Kentucky Court of Appeals just days ago. So how did that happen? As always, it comes down to poor decision-making by the defendant. Incidentally, I've often said that just about the most legally sound use of force scenario you can find yourself in is when you're dealing with genuine intruders in your home. Indeed, I've gone so far as to say that it's pretty hard to mess that scenario up and end up facing legal liability. But pretty hard doesn't mean impossible, and people insist on finding ways to get themselves jammed up even in that most favorable of self-defense scenarios. Now, as with most any trial, much of the evidence in this case is disputed by the parties and witnesses, but to keep things simple enough for our brief case of the week, we'll just go ahead and assume that the version of events recounted by the defendant, Orton, was 100% true. Those presumed truthful facts are that the defendant, who owned a local laundromat and car wash, was at home. It was after midnight when he heard a knock on his front door. When he asked who was there, he was met with silence. Then he perceived some furtive movement through the glass beside the door. He made another verbal challenge, and that's when his door started being kicked in. He quickly found himself facing 4 masked home invaders armed with guns and knives and demanding money. One pointed a handgun at the defendant's eye and threatened to kill both him and his children, who at the moment were away at his mother's house, if he did not comply with their demands. The home invaders continued their threats for some time, then grabbed some of the defendant's property, threw it in the back of their pickup truck, and raced away. And this, of course, is where things go sideways for the defendant. Did he call the police to report these events, wait for them to arrive, provide a written statement, sign a complaint? No, of course he didn't do any of that. If he had done that, we wouldn't be talking about him. Instead, what he did do was jump into his own truck and race down the only major road he'd seen the home invaders flee down. When he caught up with their vehicle, he was doing in excess of 100 miles an hour, and he rammed the rear of the invaders' Tacoma pickup truck. To quote the appellate decision, quote, "Upon impact, the Tacoma left the roadway, overturned down an embankment, and came to rest after striking a tree. While the vehicle was flipping, 3 passengers were ejected from the vehicle. One was ejected out of the vehicle against a tree and died at the scene. Another was ejected out of the vehicle and landed in the tree line. She eventually died from the injuries she sustained. A third was ejected out of the vehicle and landed in the roadway. He survived. The driver was trapped in the vehicle but successfully extricated and survived." Close quote. Incidentally, do you care to guess which of those 4 people in the car was the only one wearing a seatbelt? So we have 2 dead people, 2 severely injured, and the defendant is initially charged with capital murder, first-degree assault, and speeding. At trial, he argues several variations of the legal defense of justification, including self-defense, defense of others, meaning his children the home invaders had threatened, even though they weren't present, and the defense of necessity, or the defense of choice of lesser evils, a topic we've discussed in prior shows. The problem for these justification defenses, of course, is that every one of them requires the element of imminence. That is, that the use of purportedly justified force was necessary to prevent some harm to innocents that was about to happen right now. Certainly, the home invaders represented an imminent threat while they were engaged in home invasion, and had the defendant used force against them at that time, it might well have been legally justified. Once the home invaders had fled, however, they no longer represented an imminent threat to anyone. And if there is no imminence, there is no legal justification for any use of force. At trial, the jury ultimately found the defendant guilty of 2 counts of reckless homicide, 2 counts of 4th-degree reckless assault, and speeding. The defendant was sentenced to 15 years for the recklessness charges and fined $100 for speeding. The defendant would appeal his conviction on numerous grounds, but the Kentucky Court of Appeals in this decision would reject every claim of error at trial and affirm his convictions, sentences, and his speeding fine. Moral of the story: if you go to the fight rather than the fight coming to you, it rarely, if ever, is going to look anything like justifiable use of force. If you enjoy this content, I invite you to join us for the Law of Self-Defense live show every Wednesday, 2 p.m. Eastern. It's totally free to either participate live or to watch the recording after each show. For more information, point your browser to lawofselfdefense.com/show. Remember, as a listener to this podcast, you can save 10% on pretty much everything we do at lawofselfdefense.com, including books, DVDs, online classes, live classes, and more. Simply point your browser to lawofselfdefense.com/black or use the discount code BLACK at checkout. Remember, you carry a gun so you're hard to kill. Know the law so you're hard to convict. I'm attorney Andrew Branca for lawofselfdefense.com.
Get the book that started it all. Black Man with a Gun, Reloaded. It's the story of a man who's helped change gun rights in America, one heart at a time. It's a primer for the firearms enthusiast, and it's a fun read. It's the story of Ken Blanchard. Get yours on Amazon.com. Black Man with a Gun, Reloaded.
All right, this next part is for the Christians that have heard incorrectly all their lives about if you those who take up the sword will die by the sword. I want to put that in proper context with the help of Greg Hopkins from his great book, A Time to Kill. I talked a little bit about this on the Speak Life podcast video on Good Friday, March 30th. If you go to Speak Life podcast on Facebook, I did a short little video. I do one every morning, a prayer. And I was talking about the book of Matthew, chapter 26, verse 52, when Peter drew his sword and cut the ear off the servant of the high priest. And Jesus then said to him, "Return your sword to its place, for all who will take up the sword will die by the sword." This is one of those phrases that even non-Christians get hit with every once in a while. I want to pull something out of Scripture and from a person that I respect a lot, Greg Hopkins, from his book, A Time to Kill. Greg did a good study on this, and I want to share it with you now. Now, I know this is written for Christians, so bear with me. Our witness becomes effective when we and our adversary both know that we are in control. Jesus exercised that control in Gethsemane and told his captors so in Matthew 26:53. He could have called 72,000 angels to rescue him, but he chose obedience to his Father's plan, which is noted in Matthew 26:54. Jesus told Pilate that the only reason that he had control over him was because Jesus submitted to God's will. But some will ask, didn't Jesus deny us the use of weapons by saying, "Those who live by the sword shall die by the sword"? Yeah, it's a good question. He said that, but in saying so, he did not deny us the use of weapons or self-defense. We have already seen that Jesus made and used the weapon to clear out the temple. Yet he did not chide himself by saying, "He who lives by the scourge will die by the scourge." Was he a do as I say, not as I do kind of guy? Of course not. His statement in the garden pointed out that there is a proper time and place for everything, and that particular time was not the right time for using force on his behalf. To see what Jesus meant, we must look at all four gospel accounts of what happened that night in context. Just as reading the four accounts of the Last Supper give us a look at a complete Passover service, reading all four versions leading up to and through the events of Gethsemane give us the whole die-by-the-sword story. So let's first examine Luke 22, 35 through 38, to see how this episode began. Just before they all went to the Mount of Olives, Jesus addressed them in the upper room. And he said to them, "When I sent you out without purse and bag and sandals, you did not lack anything, did you?" And they said, "No, nothing." And he said to them, "But now, let him who has a purse take it along, likewise also a bag, and let him who has no sword sell his robe and buy one. For I tell you, that which is written must be fulfilled in me." And he was numbered with transgressors, for that which refers to me has its fulfillment. And they said, "Look, Lord, here are 2 swords. And he said to them, "It is enough." And this all comes out of Luke chapter 22, verse 35 through 38. Jesus refers to the time when he sent the 12 out in pairs on their first mission trip. He instructed them to take nothing extra with them so they could see how God would provide during that particular mission. They confirmed that all their needs were met on that mission. He later sent them out with 58 other disciples, and when they returned, he confirmed his divine protection was on them. "Behold, I have given you authority to tread on serpents and scorpions, and all over all the power of the enemy, and nothing will injure you." At the Last Supper, however, he told them that very soon he would no longer be physically with them to deflect the assaults by Satan's servants and the misfortunes of life. Throughout his ministry, Jesus and his followers were physically protected from hostile people. His fellow Nazarenes were enraged at him when he preached there. They tried to throw him off a cliff, but he simply walked through them. Neither he nor the disciples were harmed by the crowd. The violent demon of Gerasene fell at Jesus' feet instead of attacking him or the disciples. While preaching in the temple, no one could lay hands on him or the disciples. God prevented it because Jesus' mission was not completed yet. Temple officers who were sent to arrest him simply left, dumbfounded at the grace of his message. Jewish leaders even threatened to kill Lazarus after he was raised from the dead, but nothing came of it. Finally, in his prayer in John 17, Jesus states that the safety of the disciples had been in his hands. "While I was with them, I was keeping them in thy name, which thou hast given me, and I guarded them, and not one of them perished, but the son of perdition," which I believe is Judas, that the scriptures might be fulfilled. Now, logically, each time Jesus was threatened, the disciples were too. Part of his job was to keep them safe to the end of his earthly ministry. As he was leaving, he said that they must be prudent in all things. In Matthew's account of Jesus sending them out on their first mission, Jesus warned them to be shrewd as serpents and as innocent as doves, and to beware of treacherous men. In other words, they were not to be naive about the world. Paul says he was in danger of death many times during his missionary journeys, and in danger from robbers, countrymen, in the wilderness, Gentiles, the sea, the city, and from false brothers. Surely his experience of physical danger was not unique to Paul, but was shared by all the apostles throughout their careers. How high a priority did Jesus set on the disciples' need for swords for personal protection? He said swords were such necessary equipment that if they did not have one, they should sell their cloak and buy one. The cloak, or robe, was a Jew's outer garment and one of his chief possessions. If a cloak was taken as collateral on a loan, the lender could not keep it from the borrower overnight, for it was his only covering. It was his cloak for his body. What else shall he sleep in? This all come out of Exodus 22. 26 through 27. So since he was about to leave them, Jesus tells the disciples that swords would be more important than even their most valued possession. In a tough world, our lives and those of our loved ones are, of course, more precious than possessions. And I am sharing this story of the Bible because it happens during this time of the season when everybody's talking about Easter and bunnies and all the other stuff. I thought this was a nice little section of stuff that you won't hear during Good Friday and Easter Sunday. Okay? So if you say, well, I just believe God will protect me, I don't need a gun, that's fine. That's your choice. But I bet you don't live that way in other aspects of your life. I will bet you buy the safest car you can afford, and you would use seatbelts even if it wasn't mandatory. You might have smoke alarms in your home and regularly see your dentist and doctor too. If God will keep you from being a crime victim, why would he not also prevent a car accident or a house fire? Do you truly believe that only victims of crime are non-Christians? Jesus said we would need personal weapons. Paul had a need under various circumstances. You should prayerfully think it through. Remember, Jesus said that we are not to be naive about the world. And 1 Timothy 5:8 says that a Christian man who does not take care of his family is worse than an unbeliever. Don't believe me? Check it out yourself. When Jesus told them to get swords, they replied, Lord, we have 2 swords. That is enough, he answered. That's from Luke 22, verse 38. If I had to guess, it was Peter and Simon the Zealot who had the swords. Jesus told the disciples that they would need weapons when he left them. So then, what did Jesus mean about living and dying by the sword? Was Jesus a pacifist playing a trick on them? Did he tell them they would need swords just to set Peter up to make a point that Christians are not to use weapons under any circumstances? Heck no. Of course not. Nowhere in the Bible do we find Jesus engaging in a bait and switch. God is not the author of confusion. He did not tell them to bring those swords with them to the garden that night because he was still there and had them under his protection. They had come to pray. Jesus had indicated at the Last Supper that the swords were a prudent precaution and would be needed after he had left them. Jesus knew everything that would happen in the garden that night. You will fall away because of me this night, for it is written, I will strike down the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock shall be scattered. That's come way back from Zechariah 13:7, prophecy. His first concern was that the scriptures should be fulfilled, the same Old Testament prophecies by which his disciples would convince the Jews that he was the Messiah. He would not let anyone hinder that goal. How then shall the scriptures be fulfilled, that it must happen this way? But all this has taken place that the scriptures of the prophets must be fulfilled. John 18:4 says, Jesus therefore, knowing all things that are coming upon him, went forth and said to them, Whom do you seek? Jesus did not fight in the garden because Judas, the priest, and their posse were not the enemy. Satan was. Jesus knew he would defeat Satan on the cross with an empty tomb. Peter's use of the sword was in total opposition of Jesus' goal that night. He needed no help since he was in complete control of the situation. Those in the arresting crowd were already terrified of him. When he asked, Whom do you seek? They answered, Jesus the Nazarene. And Jesus responded, I am he. When he said this, they drew back and fell to the ground. Jesus knew that even token resistance would have upset God's plan for the perfect lamb to go to the cross as an unprotesting sacrifice. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. Like a lamb that is led to slaughter, and like a sheep that is silent before his shearers, so did he not open his mouth, according to Isaiah 53:7. Not by might nor by power, but by my spirit, says the Lord of hosts, Zechariah 4:6. So after a trembling posse hit the dirt, Jesus asked again, What do you want? Who do you want? And they said, Jesus of Nazareth. I told you that I am he. If therefore you seek me, let these go their way. He said this so that the prophecy might be fulfilled, that he would lose none of his faithful followers. That's John 18:7-9. The posse then surged forward to seize Jesus. Realizing that this was about to occur, at least one of the disciples asked, "Lord, shall we strike with the sword?" In Luke 22:49. Without waiting for a reply, Peter impetuously struck off the ear of Malchus, a servant of the high priest. "Stop," ordered Jesus. "Sheath your sword, for all who live by the sword shall die by the sword. Do you realize I can snap my fingers and have 12 legions of angels here instantly? But then I wouldn't have been compliant sacrifice that God requires." Then he healed Malchus's ear and submitted to the arrest, while the disciples broke and ran. Look at Jesus' reaction to Peter's untimely defense. "Put the sword into its sheath. The cup which the Father hath given me, shall I not drink it?" Peter probably reacted out of anger or sheer bravado to disprove Jesus' recent prophecy that Peter would deny him. Peter's misguided act was a perfect example that, 1, anger of a man does not achieve the righteousness of God. And when Jesus stopped Peter and healed Malchus's ear, he prevented a possible riot. A melee between the disciples and the posse would have forced his divine intervention and thwarted the fulfillment of scriptures that the disciples would escape. He said he could have summoned his angel army. A Roman legion of the first century numbered 6,000 men. Had he called 72,000 angels, also known as 12 legions, to defend him and his men, he would not have been the prophesied submissive Lamb of God. He could have allowed the riot or stopped the arrest, but he wanted to prove once and for all that he was willingly submitting to the cross so the scriptures would be fulfilled. Remember the power of angels from the story of Sennacherib, king of Assyria, and his siege of Jerusalem. Remember how one angel came down and slew 185,000 Assyrians? The point is that if one angel can do that, 12 legions of them can ruin your day. So we return to the question. Did Jesus tell them to buy swords just to set Peter up? Definitely not. Can anyone find a place in the Gospels where Jesus asked his disciples to do anything ungodly just to set them up for a fall and a lesson? Never. It is not in Jesus' nature to do so. What then did he mean by live by the sword and you'll die by it? Remember, Jesus could read minds. He knew that they had brought the sword, but knowing already what would happen, he could accomplish several things since Peter had it. He tells us not to resist legitimate authority with force. Those who do so can be lawfully harmed by law officers. The vast majority of the posse had no reason to suspect that arresting Jesus was not a lawful act. They were simply doing their jobs. Some felons have actually argued in court and on appeal that they had a right to shoot at cops because the cops pulled their guns first. No court in the nation would allow a felon a self-defense claim against police. Despite the fact that many states allow you to resist an unlawful arrest, no lawyer worth his license will advise a client to do so. Instead, we always advise people to submit to unlawful arrest peacefully and to prove it is unlawful in court later. Once a police officer decides to bring you in over your resistance, he will not give up until you are in his control. He will either increase legitimate force levels or call in reinforcements until you are under control. Peter's resistance that night put the innocent lives of both the posse and the disciples at risk. Notice that Peter did not cut off the ear of Judas, but that of Malchus, an innocent servant. Peter's downward slice was a cowardly strike at a non-threatening man who could not know the strike was coming. Jesus is telling Peter that those who use deadly force against the police or an innocent deserve death. Secondly, he tells us that the gospel is not defended by force, but by love, which he showed by healing Malchus's ear. Jesus would not have endorsed the Crusades, an aggressive war to recover the Holy Land, the wars of the Reformation where Christians killed each other over theological differences, or the forced conversion of unbelievers as done by Charlemagne. Nor would he have supported the Inquisition or various aggressive holy wars against Turks, Jews, Incas, Aztecs, or heretics. Neither would he endorse such holy wars today because none of these can be justified by Scripture. He certainly does not endorse shooting abortion doctors or bombing their clinics. As he told Pilate, Jesus' kingdom was not of this world. Otherwise, he would have allowed his men to fight to advance it. Jesus told Peter He would neither tolerate forcing anyone to accept him or fighting to thwart God's will. Third, when he said 2 swords were enough, Jesus predicted that when Peter brandished his sword, the skittish posse would assume that all the disciples were armed and let them escape rather than try to arrest them. Peter's sword convinced the posse that since they had Jesus, the small fry were not worth the trouble. Jesus' comment on living and dying by the sword told Peter that it was not the right time, place, attitude, or purpose for the use of a weapon. Remember, Jesus used a weapon, a whip, when he cleared the temple. So Jesus is telling Peter that there is a proper time, place, and purpose for appropriate weapons. But the situation in the garden was not appropriate for any resistance, let alone deadly force. Next, when Jesus said, "Those who live by the sword shall die by the sword," he meant that those who resort to force in any argument to get their way make their living by illegal violence or relying on weapons without relying on God and His Word will end up dying outside of Christ. Those who rely on force alone are those who do not rely on the fruit of the Spirit. That night, Jesus was trying to teach Peter to trust Him alone and to save the sword for the proper time. Teaching the same reliance, Moses said, "And you shall remember all the way which the Lord your God has led you in the wilderness these 40 years, that He might humble you, testing you to know what was in your heart, whether you would keep His commandments or not. And He humbled you and let you be hungry and fed you with manna which you did not know, nor did your fathers know, that He might make you understand that man does not live by bread alone, but man lives by everything that proceedeth from the mouth of the Lord." That's coming straight from Deuteronomy 8:2-3. So in other words, if I think I'm protected, successful, or, quote, a real man because I have a gun, talent, wealth, looks, or smarts, then my perception of the world is very narrow and I am spiritually bankrupt. If happiness is a warm gun, is the basis of my personal security, it is a dangerous life philosophy. Believing that, I will never depend on God or developing godly relationships with anyone. And Jeremiah put it this way, "Thus saith the Lord, cursed is the man who trusts in mankind and makes flesh his strength, and whose heart turns from the Lord. For he will be like a bush in the desert, and will not see when prosperity comes, but will live in stony waste in the wilderness, a land of salt without inhabitants." Jeremiah 17:5-6. So Peter's worldly outlook caused him to make flesh his strength that night and miss entirely what Jesus was doing. He missed the prosperity that Jesus' sacrifice and resurrection would bring. He refused to see that Jesus was fulfilling God's will. And he did not remember that Jesus had foretold him this many times. The moral is that the self-made man worships himself and nothing else. Jesus had been teaching the disciples for 3.5 years, yet they still didn't get it. In the garden that night, Peter ignored Jesus' prophecies about his sacrificial death and attempted to substitute his own outcome over the one God had planned from the beginning. By using his sword that night, Peter exemplified the saying that if your only tool is a hammer, pretty soon every problem starts to look like a nail. Instead, Jesus' statement to him was an admonition to trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will make your path straight. Just as a man cannot live a successful life by focusing on materialism or bread alone, he cannot do it by forcing his way by the sword either. Only by total reliance on God's Word, Jesus, and His Spirit can we have the more abundant life. Finally, notice that Jesus did not tell Peter to throw away the sword. He told him to put the sword back in its place. Stop, no more of this, and put the sword into its sheath. He told him to reholster it, not to throw it away. As Jesus had previously told the disciples, they would need swords later, but not now. Peter's mistake was not that he owned the sword, but that he used it at the wrong place, the wrong time, and for the wrong purpose. Like Barney Fife, Peter was going off half-cocked. Like Sheriff Andy, Jesus was limiting his Barney to one bullet, only allowing him to load his gun or pull a sword when he authorized it. Peter would learn from this, so Jesus told him to keep it where he could still carry it until it really needed it and could use it in a godly manner. Jesus told Peter that no matter what tool we use to succeed or survive in life, that tool must be guided by God's owner's manual, also known as the Bible. Matthew 6:33 says, "But seek ye first the kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added to you." I'm hoping that made some sense to you. It did to me. I'm hoping there was something that I could pull out of there that you can pull out a little later for when somebody says about that sword thing, and you go, that ain't true. How do I know? The Bible told me so. If you want to get a really good book with some more of this stuff in there, check out Greg Hopkins' The Myth of Christian Pacifism. The book is called A Time to Kill. It's a good resource for you if you're in the Christian way of living, that is.
Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah.
Have you heard my other podcast? Speak Life. Proverbs 18:21 says that life and death are in the power of the tongue. Join me in faith and be a part of my family on a podcast that gives you what you missed in church. SpeakLifePodcast.com. Serving Jesus without boundaries. SpeakLifePodcast.com. And we're on Facebook too. SpeakLifePodcast.com. All right, that's it for this week, and I want to thank you for being with me. If you want to reach me, you can contact me at blackmanwithagun@gmail.com. Visit blackmanwithagun.com when you get a chance. And remember, to the world, you may be one person, but to one person, you may be the world. I created a new store at store.blanchard.media. Check that out. There's t-shirts, hats, hoodies, coffee mugs, all kind of cool stuff with some real new designs that I got out there at store.blanchard.media. Check it out when you get a chance. Sales will help me get to the NRA meeting.
Until next time, friends.
To keep in touch with Ken and his cause, head over to blackmanwithagun.com.
A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. The day I passed my gun safety course, I went hunting with my dad. Weekends in the woods with him were the best times I ever had. So when I hear some politician trying to take that freedom away, I stand my ground. I don't back down. I've got a gun that can feed my family. I've got one that protects my home. It's my right by the Constitution to keep and bear the arms I own. I'm a law-abiding, patriotic American to the bone, and I will defend it. The Second Amendment. My neighbor doesn't own a gun. He doesn't care at all. I tell him they take away the Second Amendment. You can watch the others fall. Yeah, we shouldn't have to fight for the rights we've always had. But there comes a time